About 8 years ago, I lived in a small town nestled in the mountains. The area had a lot of vacant and abandoned houses, remnants of a once thriving community that had slowly dwindled over the years. My boyfriend at the time, and I, had a bit of a fascination with exploring these forgotten places. We loved the thrill of it, the mystery, and the history. One summer, we decided to explore a couple of these houses, and one of those experiences still haunts me to this day. The first house we explored was downright terrifying. It was situated off a narrow, winding stone road, surrounded by a few scattered homes, most of which were also abandoned. Even though it was less than a mile from where we lived, we decided to drive there. It was a hot and humid day, and the sun was just beginning to set, casting long shadows that made everything look more eerie. The house was set back from the road and had a long, overgrown driveway. As we approached, we noticed something peculiar. Old appliances like stoves, washers, dryers, and refrigerators lined the driveway on either side. It was as if someone had carefully arranged them there. The house itself was massive, a split-level structure that loomed ominously against the dusky sky. The front door was missing its steps, so we made our way to the side entrance. The door there had already been kicked in, and it creaked open with a loud groan, sending a shiver down my spine. Inside, the house was completely gutted. The air was thick and musty, and the temperature seemed to drop several degrees as soon as we stepped in. The first thing that struck us was the rows of tall Jesus candles lining the hallway on both sides. There had to be at least 100 of them, their wicks long burnt out. It felt like we were stepping into some kind of ritual site. We made our way up the steps towards the main area. The walls were covered in graffiti, some of it nonsensical, but some of it depicting disturbing images and phrases. I was already on edge, but curiosity drove us further. We climbed the steps to the main level and stopped in front of a door slightly to the right of the kitchen. Heavy plastic sheeting, layered and thick, served as a makeshift door, obscuring whatever was inside. We hesitated for a moment, then decided to push the plastic aside and see what lay beyond. The room we entered was small, and in the center stood a folding table with a single chair. On the table was one plate, one fork, one spoon, and one cup, which was knocked over. The air in the room was oppressive, heavy with a sense of despair and sadness. It felt as if the last person to occupy the room had been overwhelmed with sorrow. There were no signs of violence, but the atmosphere was suffocating. In one corner of the room, a closet door stood slightly ajar. We heard a faint noise coming from inside. Expecting to find an animal, we cautiously opened the door. Hanging on a hook was a black top hat, nothing else. The sight of it made my anxiety skyrocket, and the air seemed to grow even heavier. I told my boyfriend I couldn't take it anymore and wanted to leave. He wanted to explore a little more, so he asked me to wait at the top of the steps. Reluctantly, I agreed. He hadn't gone more than 10 steps down the hall when the plastic sheeting from the doorway suddenly flew open. A powerful rush of air surged past me, almost knocking me over. My heart pounded in my chest as I struggled to regain my balance. My boyfriend heard the commotion and sprinted back towards me. He grabbed my arm, practically lifting me off the ground, and we bolted down the steps and out the door. We didn't stop running until we were back in the car, panting and wide-eyed. To this day, I have no explanation for what happened, but that plastic couldn't have moved on its own. The second house we explored that summer was a stark contrast to the first. It was a small, quaint house that had clearly been vacant for a long time. The roof had started to collapse, and the garden was overgrown with weeds and wildflowers. We entered through the front door, which was surprisingly intact. Inside, it felt as if time had stood still. The air was warm and filled with the scent of old wood and dust. Sunlight streamed through the broken windows, casting a soft golden glow over everything. It seemed like whoever had lived there had just left one day and never returned. Dishes were still on the drying rack next to the sink. A wallet with an ID and old faded photographs lay on the kitchen counter, and dentures sat in a glass on the bathroom sink. The medicine cabinet was filled with bottles of pills that had expired decades ago. It was sad, like stepping into a forgotten life. As we explored further, we found all sorts of fascinating relics. In one of the bedrooms, we discovered an old WW1 or WW2 uniform hanging in the closet, along with a neatly folded flag. There was an antique sewing machine, a record player with a stack of vinyl records, and a dusty old book filled with handwritten entries dating back to the 1890s. The book contained detailed records of railroad information, costs of materials, and personal letters between family and friends. It was incredible to see history come to life like that. We didn't take anything, but it was amazing to feel like we had stepped back in time. Years later, after I had moved away, I drove by that house during a visit to my old town. It was gone, replaced by a modern building. But the memories of that summer, especially the haunting experience in the first house, have stayed with me. Every time I think about it, I get chills. There's something about abandoned places that holds a strange, eerie beauty, a reminder of lives once lived and stories untold. One of my favorite hobbies is photography, and I always look for unique and eerie locations to capture through my lens. During a work trip to Virginia, my friend and I decided it would be the perfect opportunity to explore some abandoned places for Halloween-themed photographs. After some driving around and quick phone research, we stumbled upon an old, dilapidated insane asylum from the 1950s. It seemed like a gold mine for capturing spooky, atmospheric shots. The asylum's exterior was foreboding. All the doors were locked, boarded up, and secured with surveillance cameras, which made finding a way inside quite challenging. After some persistence and creative problem-solving, we discovered a partially broken window that led to what appeared to be the kitchen. We managed to find an old, rickety chair nearby, which we used to climb through the window. Stepping inside, we were immediately struck by the cold and dampness of the air. The darkness enveloped us like a thick blanket, and the silence was so profound that it felt almost oppressive. As soon as I set foot on the cracked tile floor, an eerie chill ran down my spine. It was as though the building itself was aware of our presence and was watching us. My friend, who was more adventurous and less rattled, was eager to explore further, while I began taking photos of the broken remnants of the asylum. There were overturned chairs, rusting medical equipment, and peeling paint that seemed to hold echoes of the asylum's grim history. My friend wandered down a hallway with the ominous phrase, "All who enter die," scrawled on the wall in faded, dripping letters. I hesitated to follow. Between the unnerving atmosphere and my focus on capturing photographs, I wasn't ready to delve deeper into the asylum just yet. Not even 30 seconds had passed when my friend burst back into the room, his face pale and eyes wide with fear. "All right, I've seen enough. Let's go." "Now," he said urgently, his voice barely above a whisper. "What happened? Did you see something?" I asked, my curiosity piqued. He didn't respond verbally, but instead made a beeline for the window we had entered through. As he climbed out, I felt a surge of curiosity mixed with apprehension. I leaned over and peeked down the hallway he had just fled from. At the end of the corridor, I saw an empty chair with something small perched on it, which initially looked like a ball or a piece of debris. Suddenly, the object slid off the chair and fell to the floor with a soft thud. My heart raced, and a wave of fear washed over me. "Oh, hell no!" I yelled, scrambling towards the window. My friend was waiting on the other side, so I threw him my camera and quickly clambered out, scraping my hands in the process. I didn't care about the cuts and bruises. I just wanted to get out of there. We raced back to the car, jumped in, and sped away from the asylum as quickly as we could. It wasn't until we were a few miles down the road, still shaken, that we finally calmed down enough to talk about what had happened. "Did you see that thing on the chair? When I looked down the hallway, I saw something in that chair, and then it fell to the floor," I said, my voice trembling. My friend looked at me with a mix of shock and disbelief. It wasn't a ball. I was walking down the hallway, peeking into the empty rooms. It was creepy seeing the overturned beds and scattered debris everywhere. When I got closer to the end of the hallway, I saw a small doll sitting in the chair. I thought it was strange and spooky, probably left there by someone else. But then, as soon as I thought that, the doll went from sitting upright to lying flat on its side. I thought it might have been a draft or something that caused it to move. But when you mentioned that it fell to the floor, I knew it couldn't have been just a breeze. That really freaked me out. We continued to discuss the events, piecing together our experiences and feelings. My friend described how the deeper he went into the asylum, the more intense the oppressive atmosphere felt. He recalled hearing faint whispers that seemed to come from nowhere, and shadows that appeared to shift and move just out of sight. It was as if the building itself was alive, with a malevolent presence that watched us closely. The more we talked, the more I began to reflect on my own experiences. I shared how the chill that had gripped me upon entering seemed to intensify as we explored, and how I felt an ever-present sense of being observed. We both agreed that the asylum exuded a sense of unfinished business, as if something were trying to communicate with us or warn us away. Despite the fear, part of me was fascinated by the experience. There was an undeniable allure to the place, a sense that it held secrets waiting to be uncovered. But rationality prevailed. Some places are best left undisturbed. Over the next few days, I reviewed the photos I took, scrutinizing every detail for any anomalies. To my surprise, several images contained strange and inexplicable features: blurry shapes that resembled faces, orbs of light in places where no lights should have been, and shadows that defied the sources of illumination in the room. I showed the pictures to my friend, and he was equally startled by what we had captured. We debated whether these anomalies were simply tricks of light, dust particles, or something more supernatural. The experience left us both with a profound sense of unease and more questions than answers. So yeah, I know it might not sound very scary in the retelling, but you had to be there. The combination of cold, eerie silence and the isolation of the asylum created the perfect conditions for a fear that was more intense than anything I had ever experienced before.